Hi, good afternoon. I'm Setti Warren. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School. And I'm also a former mayor. I was the mayor of Newton, Massachusetts for 8 years. I'm delighted to moderate this program on city leadership. Joining us here at the Harvard Chan studio are Bill de Blasio, a Democrat who served as mayor of New York City from 2014 to 2021. G.T. Bynum, a Republican, who has been mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma since 2016, and Annise Parker, a Democrat, who served as mayor of Houston from 2010 to 2016. And joining us remotely is Steve Benjamin, who served as mayor of Columbia, South Carolina from 2010 to 2022, and who is now a senior advisor and director of the Office of Public Engagement at the White House. Welcome, mayors. Please give the mayors welcome.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to you all. As mayors, you all are on the front line of many public health issues, from climate change to homelessness to crime. We're here to learn the ways you tackle these challenges and hear about lessons that might be applied to communities across the country. We're going to do a deep dive on a few issues. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask each one of you about each issue, but you will hear from all the mayors today. I'm also going to intersperse our conversation with some lightning round questions to get some quick insights about your leadership. So we're going to jump right in on a lightning round question, 30 seconds each. Let's go with this one, which I think is an intriguing one. What's the most important quality that a mayor today needs to have? Please give me a one-word answer. And then give me a sentence on why you chose that word. Let's start with Bill here.
All right. The one word is vision. And by the way, I'm having flashbacks to debates with the lightning round. Vision, because to sustain yourself and to have an impact, you have to be pulled by an agenda of vision that affects everything you do all the time, that rises above the constant reactive realities, the crises, the things that will throw you off. You could get lost in that. You could just do reactivity all day long. If you are both someone who feels and believes in a vision, but also knows how to keep it in the front of your mind, the front of your face at all times, you can succeed. If you don't have vision, you get unmoored and live that kind of reactive and less productive life.
That's great. We'll just go down the line here.
I'm actually going to say the same thing, but with a different word, perspective.
Amen.
I think for any mayor, on any day, there are crises that come up. Maybe they're big ones, maybe they're small ones. But if you spend all your time reacting to the crisis of the day, you can lose focus on your long-term objectives. And keeping those long-term goals in perspective is crucial if you're going to be effective.
So the word I would use is you have to be pragmatic. And it's a little bit of what both of them said. Imagine that you're riding a skateboard down the middle of the street and you're dodging potholes and you're weaving and you're juggling balls and there's people on both sides of the street screaming at you as you're going down the street. That's what every day as a mayor is like. And to be able to figure out which balls are the most important to catch or to throw to somebody else, which voices to hear, which voices to screen out, and keeping your city moving forward. So vision, you have to know where you're going, and you have to have perspective, but you also have to make hard choices every day and figuring out what's a priority.
That's a perfect representation of life as mayor.
Yeah.
We don't have potholes in Tulsa.
You wouldn't know.
We have a lot of them in Houston. I'm just saying.
I'm not going to comment on Newton right now. Let's go to Mayor Benjamin.
Yeah, let's hear this.
Yeah. Hey, all my friends. I miss seeing you all in person. The word I choose, Setti, is empathy. Empathy. I mean, the reality is that, particularly in the age we're living in right now, as people emerge from the greatest pandemic in over 100 years, probably the greatest economic disruption many families saw since the 1930s, and and the greatest social unrest after the murder of George Floyd that we've seen all combined in a couple of years. I mean, we all knew this as we served as mayors beforehand, but the work being done now and the pain that people have felt. I think what we do best as local officials is we're there, we're proximate to the people, and being able to truly understand and feel their pain, and be able to deliver on the vision and pragmatic, thoughtful solutions to their problems. We have to be able to feel their pain. So I'd say empathy.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I love all those answers, and I would add there's a values component to being mayor. People need to know what your values are. I think if I were to answer that question, which I'm doing now,
Yes,
taking
appear to be.
moderator, yeah, taking moderator's prerogative, I think that that's important too. People need to know the values of the person in the corner office. I want to shift to one of the more difficult issues facing cities across America, and that is housing the unhoused. There are nearly 600,000 people in this country living without housing. So let me turn to you, Mayor Parker. Houston has been held up as a model because of your housing first approach. Can you tell us about that initiative, why it seems to be working, what are the ups and downs of it?
So I want us to be careful when we say housing first. It sounds like that's all you have to do. And we, across the country, need all sorts of housing. We need housing for the homeless. We need low-income housing, workforce housing, housing options. Housing first is simply the recognition that if you're dealing with someone on the street who has mental health issues or substance abuse issues or just is in crisis, they can't deal with those crises without being somehow safely housed. It's just one more burden that is hard to navigate through. What we did in Houston, and in my inaugural speech in 2012, I said we were going to move the needle on homelessness. We actually started before then, and Houston has a couple of advantages. We are the largest unzoned city in America. And people laugh at me when I say that it's a benefit. But it means that the land values are closer to the market than any place else. There's no artificial constraints. And we can redevelop areas very rapidly and put new housing on the ground. The other, but Houston is in Texas. It's a low tax, low service state. There's not much of a safety net. And cities are pretty much on their own to deal with this. But the Obama administration did an initiative of housing homeless veterans, and they offered money to cities, and they did it in the form of a challenge. Could you house 100 homeless veterans in 100 days? And just a handful of cities decided to take on the challenge. Houston doesn't have a big base, but we have a large VA and we have a large veterans population in the area. And like, oh yeah, we'll try this. This is before I launched my initiative, and what happened was that because we'd taken this challenge, I brought every agency that dealt in some way or another with the homeless, and I understand homeless and houseless, and they're different things, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but brought all these agencies together and said, we have a mission. It's like, we're going to put on a show. We have a mission. We're going to house 100 homeless veterans in 100 days. Everybody ante up. And this was new money to do the initiative, and so no one felt threatened. I wasn't moving their cheese. Everybody was engaged. And we housed 103 veterans, homeless veterans, in 100 days. And I said, all right, we're going to do it again. And we did it again. And we did it again. We did it 3 times. And by the time we did it 3 times, I knew everyone's skill set. I knew where their resources. I had a good sense of the ones who were willing to work and not. And then I said, okay, now we're going to do something bigger, because the Veterans Initiative wasn't solely on the chronically homeless, it was on homeless veterans. But here's the really important piece. We had a lot of agencies, and this is what happens in every city. What is the biggest problem? You have great agencies and they're all working in parallel. They're not a system. There's no such thing as a homeless system in most cities. There's homeless agencies doing good work but not converging on the problem. So I forced them into a system. Everybody had their own intake platform. We forced them we have one intake platform. Everybody has to be on it, so I can find somebody through the system, because they would come to one housing agency and get treatment. This one is the job search help. This one is dealing with health care. And they weren't talking to each other. So we forced them into one system. And I also, when we initially, we did because of our work with the veterans, I knew what particular services each one did, but we did a heads in bed survey, and we had about 10,000 homeless on the streets of Houston when I started. We had hundreds of beds every night that were vacant, but every agency had their own criteria of who they wanted to serve. And there was a complete mismatch with who was actually on the street as to what the beds were. So then it's like I knew the landscape, I knew who the players were, I knew who would work with me, who wouldn't. And then I got my baseball bat out, essentially, and said, I am moving your money. We're going to fund the agencies that are best at these particular services. And if you can find other money, that's great. But anything that's got a federal dollar attached to it, I'm going to put it where that we can maximize services. And then the third big thing was that we started building housing as rapidly as we could. And it's a very, very fast permitting environment, a matter of months rather than years. And so all of those things converging. But the biggest thing was creating a system, and somebody has to have the ability to force people to play nicely in the sandbox.
Amen.
Thank you for that answer. Mayor de Blasio, you had a plan to create 300,000 apartments in New York City and to house 700,000 unhoused people.
Yeah, 700,000 people who need affordable
So,
housing.
okay, can you talk about that plan? What worked?
Yeah.
What are the challenges?
Yeah, I think we had a really positive experience with affordable housing writ large for people of all different kinds of need. We had a much more tortured path on homelessness. The good news in the affordable housing equation is and this is a controversial statement, my colleagues will understand this reality, in challenging many American cities. If you're willing to build tall buildings, if you're willing to have dense situations where people are living in close proximity and particularly near transportation, you can do miraculous things in terms of affordable housing and addressing the part of the homelessness crisis that is literally lack of affordable housing. I always say, with deepest respect to our colleagues in San Francisco, they are so stuck in their unwillingness to build up and build out and have created, in effect, kind of a trap for themselves. But to be fair, any development is controversial. New York City is a place where everything's controversial. And it wasn't easy, but the good news on this, the thing that worked, was saying, let's do something really, really big. Let's incentivize the private sector. Let's put really strong requirements on them whenever we did rezonings. And we actually are well on our way to hitting that number of 300,000 apartments and 700,000 people served. And when you think about that, I mean, that's, in New York City terms, that's not enough. In the rest of this country, that would be like the whole city in many places, right? So the good news is things can happen, they can happen fast. The problem we found was on homelessness. It took us way too long, and I've sort of had to accept this responsibility publicly, of like, we didn't see until well into our administration the thing we were missing on street homelessness. And one day I had the opportunity to go out with our homeless outreach teams and see the incredible work they do reaching folks who, it's so important to remember, Dr. Howard Koh has done incredible work on the issue of homelessness. We thank you in trying to get the academic world to really engage this more. Every single human being who was homeless once was living a life, and I'm going to use a horrible freighted word, normal. People were living a functional life and something went wrong, whether that something was financial, whether it was a mental health challenge, whether it was substance misuse, something went wrong and put them on a different path. And our job is to get everyone back to a better life. When you see that conversation between a really well-trained outreach worker and a person whose life hasn't worked out, and the compassion and the sort of insight and trying to find that answer, what do they need to come in off the street? It's incredibly inspiring, but it took us too long to understand what we needed was to keep coming back to that individual as an individual. that we needed to understand literally every single human being on our streets, what their personal history was. We needed to be able to go to them not just 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, 200 times, with people they could trust and gain trust with, to eventually be able to sort of crack the code person by person, what's going to allow them to come in off the street. And that started to work. Took us a long time, but we finally got there.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. I want to turn to Mayor Bynum. You're trying to raise $500 million to build more housing in your city. I have sort of a two-part question. One is, how do you deal with the forces that may push against this, the developers who may push against this, or frankly, politicians who do not like more public spending and do not like the idea of sort of pouring more money into a challenge. So I'm wondering about the politics of how you're going to achieve your goal.
Sure. I mean, we're in a unique moment right now, I think for our city, but I think for a lot of other cities around America. I was at a convening of mayors about a year ago that was organized by the Kennedy School, and we were going through a case study on addressing homelessness. And I quickly realized, I was sitting there thinking, well, I'm so thankful that we're talking about this because this is the huge problem in my city. And as we went around the table, quickly realized mayors of all different sizes of cities, and in both North America and South America were at that table, and all of them were saying this is a huge challenge that we're trying to face. For our community, I think the kind of historical pivot we're in right now is historically the city government in Tulsa did not have a role in addressing housing. We were a pass-through for federal funds. We would send them out to nonprofits and they would take it from there. And what we've realized over the last few years is that's just not enough. We saw a significant spike in the visibility of homelessness in Tulsa when the pandemic hit, and the shelters that we've historically relied upon had to reduce their occupancy rates so that they could have social distancing. But those shelters are now back up to full occupancy, and the numbers are still high and visible. And so we convened experts in the field. We're fortunate in Tulsa, and it sounds like similarly in Houston, we have so many people who've been working on this issue where the city government had not been as engaged as it should be, who we could rely on for advice. And we talked a whole lot about Houston. I am so thankful that Mayor Parker launched that initiative when she did, because we have looked at the Houston example as a real model of what we should be doing in Tulsa. And what was fascinating was everybody that we talked to, all the experts in the field, in government, in nonprofit work, in faith-based institutions, everyone, they had lots of different ideas, but a common thread through all of that was we need more housing in Tulsa. A local philanthropic foundation commissioned a study on housing in our city. What we found was our city, we're not like blowing the doors out with growth, but it's grown just enough that it's pinched all areas of housing. We do not have enough housing in any category in Tulsa right now. But 80% of that over the next several years is going to be addressed by the private sector and the market. But there's 20% of that they won't. And this is shelter space, supportive housing, transitional housing, and that's where the government has to take a greater role. And so what I've announced, and I'm really thankful we have broad support, bipartisan support on our city council for this, is that we have a $100 million initiative that the citizens are going to vote on in August, where the city will be much more engaged in picking up our share of what needs to be done on the governmental side. And so far to date, we've been doing town halls all week on this actually, and the people that have been coming out for this are very supportive of it. And so we're bringing money to the table, but then the other key piece of that is the regulatory environment. You can look around the country and see lots of cities that have had good intentions with bringing money to the table for housing in their city, but the regulatory environment for building is so intense, kind of the point you were making, Mayor, that building doesn't occur even when there's money available to do it. And so we're evaluating the regulatory environment we have in Tulsa to make sure that the red carpet is rolled out for people that want to build housing in our city, the red tape is cut, and that there's funds available both from an incentive standpoint, but also on that 20% of housing that isn't going to get built by the private sector that we've got to do from a government alone. So I think to answer your question, it's a reliance on experts, bringing the experts to the table, and then when all of your experts are saying there's this one thing that we've got to do, and looking to a city that has already proven it out and the impact of it, it makes it a pretty successful sell so far in a very conservative city like Tulsa.
That's great. Before I move on, Massachusetts has a very serious zoning problem. We have 351 cities and towns that have zoned in ways that prevent density, families that are homes that are not single-family homes. I had those challenges in Newton. They're very, very difficult. So I know that the governor tried to build some incentives to allow for additional housing. But I really appreciate what you all said, and Annise, I really appreciate what you said, and Bill, about the fact that it's not just about the physical housing, it's about the people. 2 out of 3 Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck. And we just released our youth poll. Young people are very concerned about homelessness for themselves because they know that the workforce stability is not there. So I appreciate all of your answers there. I want to move.
Setti, can we just
sure.
say though, probably the biggest impediment is cave people, NIMBYs, and bananas. Cave people, citizens against virtually everything. NIMBYs, not in my backyard, and bananas build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone.
Yeah.
And
No, that's true. I mean,
These are memorable phrases.
I want to get
Take
that out in the
notes.
ether.
we've all been a part of this. I mean, Bynum. I mean, we all
We have
Yes.
to. We have to build density. We have to build
Yes.
low-income
I
housing,
agree.
homeless housing for the homeless. People
Yes.
don't want it. You
Yes.
have to get past that.
Yeah, and we've also got to deal with the hunger crisis in this country, the transportation infrastructure, and the health piece. They're all, and you mentioned this, they're all a part of the same ecosystem here. It's not just about the physical.
And I do want to stress, because I think Mayor Parker is exactly right, that housing is the first step, because
That's
people
right.
can be much more successful
Yeah.
in accessing those things if they have a roof over their head.
That's right.
But it can't just be that, and
That's
you
right.
hope that things take care of themselves.
That's right. Thank you, Mayor. I want to move back to a lightning round. 1 minute each on this one. And just a couple of sentences. What is the best advice you ever got on how to be a good leader, and who gave you that advice? I'd like to start with Mayor Benjamin first.
I'd say Annise Parker telling me to carry a baseball bat, apparently. No, it's amazing where we get our most sound advice. Mine probably came from my grandmother, and she'd always tell me that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. And I think particularly in the business that we're in public service, so often nowadays you have people who are yelling at each other and not listening to each other. So when you listen to one another, it's amazing that you can realize that 2 people equally yoked can see the same thing very differently. So how do you understand the fact that we all suffer from some degree of experiential blindness and try to learn from each other to build thoughtful, pragmatic solutions that help people? The reality, I know the 4 mayors sitting at that table, very much like me, we know that if we aren't able to listen to each other and solve problems, then the people we care about most, the people who need us the most, will suffer if we can't listen.
Amen.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's go to Mayor Parker next on that.
Well, like Mayor Benjamin, it would be from my grandmother, and that's do the hardest job you have first, so that you have the energy to tackle it and the time to tackle it. And then when it gets hard, if you believe that you are right, never give up.
For me, I would say it wasn't like verbal advice. It was an example. Ironically, in D.C., I worked as an aide in the U.S. Senate, and that's a fascinating lab for leadership to see. You have all these different politicians elected from their states, from all across the country, and as an aide there, I got to see who was effective and who wasn't, and very quickly realized that 95% of the stuff that gets introduced into Congress is just political garbage so that somebody can go home and brag about, throw the red meat out to their base and talk about something they've introduced that will never be heard in committee and will never be voted for on the floor. but there are things that do have to get done. And the senators that were most effective at that at the time when I was working there, they would see something that needed to be done and then go to the other side of the political spectrum as far out as they could get from themselves, but identify somebody who generally agreed with them in principle, and then they would bring forward legislation that represented that consensus and common ground. Ted Kennedy was a master of this. Joe Biden was a master of this. Mitch McConnell was very good at this when I was there. And I took that and have tried to apply that in everything that I've done, both in 8 years on our city council in Tulsa, and now I'll have 8 years as mayor. I think you bring forward, you can be more effective when you're willing to work with people of broad opinions and life experiences, but find that common ground and move that forward. And the last thing I'll add on this, my old boss, Senator Don Nichols, told me one time that you should try to disagree without being disagreeable. That if you question somebody's motives in a debate or you personally attack them, you're reducing your own ability to be effective the next day when you have to work with them on something you agree on. And so I've tried to adhere to that as well.
Well, I first want to say, all of us who are mayors or have been mayors feel a deep connection to each other and pride in one of our own when they continue to higher heights. I just want to shout out my brother Steve Benjamin for he's just beaming in from the White House now. So we are proud of you. We appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
But
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. The advice was given to me by a mentor who played a pivotal role in the Clinton administration, Harold Ickes. His dad was the Harold Ickes of the Roosevelt administration, a key architect of the New Deal. The Harold Ickes I knew was really tough on the people who served under him in a really righteous way and taught us to get ready for tough circumstances. And he had an edgy but very appropriate message. He said, if you have not made enemies, you have not done anything of consequence in political life.
Hear, hear.
And I know folks are very worried, rightfully. I've spoken to so many people at Chan and IOP and other places about sort of the negative environment out there. But this quote predates social media. And I think the point is to say political life, public life has always been contentious because the stakes are so high, because if you want to do anything to change the status quo does not yield particularly easily. As Frederick Douglass said, power grants nothing without a demand. But I think the notion of seeing honor in the fact that you can do good, and you'll make enemies, but don't let that drag you down. See that as an indicator of impact. That really fueled me, including in some very tough moments.
Someone said to me, what are you willing to lose your seat for?
Perfect.
What are you, and if you can't answer that,
Yes.
Then you're not truly leading.
Exactly.
That was great. Thank you all.
That's
for
a smart
those.
person.
Yes, yes. Thank you all for those answers. I want to turn to the issue of crime and gun violence, which is plaguing many of our cities around the country. And I want to start with Mayor Benjamin. Mayor, you've talked a lot about how you personally own firearms, yet you were very focused on taking guns off the street and imposing gun control measures like banning bump stocks. How'd you strike the balance between the Second Amendment, rights and safety, and what lessons did you learn about navigating those politics?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Never easy in a country in which there are more guns in the street than there are human beings on the street. We are indeed in a crisis that not only affects the street violence that we still see in every city, suburban and rural area in this country, not just in America's cities. But our goal, as we discussed it in South Carolina and Columbia, South Carolina, was important to me, I will say as well, that some of the policymaking we were doing, I aggressively pursued those issues to show people that, yes, in the heart of the Deep South, there could be some thoughtful, progressive, common sense policymaking that reflected the will of the people. The vast majority of Republicans, the vast majority of Democrats all want to see common sense gun policies. And we did that by focusing, yes, on data and sharing good data with people, but not only stopping our discussion, as so many people do, on the issue of gun rights, but also talking about the responsibilities that come with gun ownership. I had the privilege of serving as chief of our state's second largest law enforcement agency at a very young age. I was 29 years old, and I learned at that point not only how to use a firearm, but the responsibilities, the significant responsibilities that came along with it. And I will tell you, we continue, I believe, as a country to be in a battle for the soul of our country. This gun violence epidemic exists only here in the United States of America, nowhere else. And the work that we have to do, working collectively, yes, this president has been leading from the front, but mayors are leading on the ground every single day. There's still so much work to do. The violence we see on the streets, mass shootings, which seem to line up in our headlines every single day, the issues around gun safety and making sure people secure their firearms, and certainly as well the issue of suicide by gun. There's so much more work to do, but we tried to lead in the very deep South by just focusing on common sense solutions and being unapologetic, as Annise said earlier, the issues that you know you're right on, and you got good data to follow up on, and you take that data and you wrap it up in human packaging so people can understand it and not just see it here, but feel it here. And we found some success there. We were strident, and I'm very happy. I wound up being sued by our Attorney General regularly, and I took it as a source of pride because we were doing the right things for the right reasons and saving lives because of it.
Thank you for that. You know, Steve, I was with one of the Tennessee Three yesterday, Representative Justin Pearson. He came to the Institute of Politics, did a forum. I spent quite a bit of time with him, and he echoes your sentiment. He believes that common sense approach, most people believe that this violence needs to end, and he believes organizing will help do that, and including young people in that can make a change in the Deep South. So he shares your sentiment. I want to turn to Mayor Bynum. You have taken a very data-driven approach to addressing crime and blight in Tulsa. What did you learn along the way? Were there any surprises that you saw?
Well, I'd say there are things we've learned around the use of data and also around crime. First, on the side of data, I got engaged in that as a city councilor, really more thinking that we would use data to, eliminate waste and make government more efficient and effective. And what I quickly realized, going through several fellowship programs and engaging on it, and then running for mayor as a committed nonpartisan who had Republicans and Democrats and independents all working to get me elected, was that data actually, probably the most valuable thing that it presents in today's environment is it's a tool for people of very diverse political philosophies to take issues and boil them down to practical problem solving. And so we've tried to utilize the use of data at the city to do that, to bring people together who are going to vote for all sorts of different presidential candidates next year, but all agree that we want Tulsa to be a city where people have greater equality of opportunity, where crime is lower, where streets get fixed more effectively. One of the other kind of lessons that we learned that was surprising was we had so many initiatives that people wanted us to apply data to and look at, that there was no way I could hire enough people, data analysts, to do all of this work. And so we put out a call for data analysts in the community who might want to volunteer their time to work on what we called the Urban Data Pioneers, which was an intentionally corny name. And I thought like 6 people would show up.
It worked, and it's corny.
It did. We had over 100 people show up in engaging cohorts that helped us analyze problems. And what we learned from that was that in any community, Tulsa is no exception here, you have people who are analyzing data in hospitals, in banks, in companies, who have this remarkably unique skill set but are never asked to use it to serve their community. And given the opportunity to do that, we'll jump at it. We applied this kind of data-driven approach to look at fighting crime in Tulsa. And I think we brought in to have a completely independent organization look at crime in Tulsa and how we could reduce it. The University of Cincinnati, which has no ties to Oklahoma or our city. And what they found was we were staffing our police department based on kind of national standards of having 2 officers for every 1,000 people. So a city of Tulsa size aiming to have 800 officers. But when you look at our rates of crime in Tulsa and use that as the measure, that we should actually have about 950 officers. So we had been aiming for a completely incorrect goal from a staffing level. Now that staffing level, the reason for that is really important. What we had been doing, and a lot of cities across the country, I think, fell into the trap of doing this over the last quarter century, is we were staffing for 911 call response. So somebody calls 911, how quickly does an officer get to the scene? But and so our officers were spending about 95% of their shift in a car going from one call to another to another. But if you want to reduce crime in a community, you have to build relationships between officers and the people that they serve. And that's called community policing. And the idea behind community policing is an officer should be spending 35 to 40% of their shift not responding to calls, in Tulsa's case, out of their car, getting to know the business owners and neighborhood leaders on their beat so that they can be proactive in addressing crime, and so that when people see something or hear something, they have a direct relationship with an officer. They don't have to trust the police overall, but they know this one officer who took the time to meet them, seemed like a good person, they can reach out to them directly. And so that's the entire strategy behind now our police staffing model that we're pursuing, and all of the technology we're deploying is to build those ties between citizens and the officers who serve them. I think so many of the challenges that we see in America right now are because those relationships are non-existent, because officers have been put in the position of being reactive rather than proactive. So we think that by using data to prove out the value of a community policing model, we're going to deliver greater public safety for citizens and have better community engagement with the officers who serve them.
Great, thank you for those answers. I want to shift back to our lightning round here. This was touched upon a little earlier. The sort of political discourse and discourse in general has just worsened. You've all, in the last several years, you've all endured name calling, particularly on social media, on web-based stories that are pretty nasty. In a sentence or two, can you share how you learned to cope with that kind of invective? And we'll go this way. We'll start with the mayor. You had 8 million New Yorkers you served. Many were opinionated, and they're very local citizens there. So we'll start this way, and then we'll go around.
Yes, if you want to have a really dramatic experience, go have a town hall meeting with hundreds of New Yorkers who can say anything they want. And I did that 70 different times, so I lived it. And I think the key is do not read your social media feed. Do not read the comments. And I don't mean that to be facetious. There used to be a thing about athletes that they wouldn't read the sports pages, because they just wanted to focus on their craft and not be distracted by haters and negativity. I think you can get real feedback on real issues without being pulled down into the muck and the negativity that unfortunately pervades Twitter.
I found probably 2 strategies effective. One, when I'm giving speeches, sometimes I like to read some of the comments, the mean tweets. People say I'm GT Bynum. People call me PT Barnum. Like, not even creative. Come on.
Yeah.
Let's elevate our game a little bit here. But I think for me, in seriousness, I benefit greatly because my grandfather was the mayor of Tulsa for 8 years back in the 1970s, and before I was ever elected mayor, I would read old newspaper articles from 50 years before about his time as mayor, as one does. And what I found was that he stayed focused on doing important things for the community. And people said all sorts of awful things in the heat of the moment, but nobody remembered those 50 years later.
Right.
And so for me, the perspective that went was 50 years from now, 90% of the people who care that I was mayor of Tulsa are probably going to be my kids and my family. And so what am I doing right now that they will be proud of 50 years from now? And don't worry about the immediacy of negative commentary. Again, it's playing the long game and having that long-term perspective of the impact of the work that we have an opportunity to do in the greatest job in public service.
Right.
I'm going to agree with him. Yes, social media is not the real world. Do not read the comments. You have to know what you're doing is right, though. And if you feel like what you're doing is right, put your head down and keep going and don't listen. Recognizing that you have to be, to Mayor Benjamin's comment earlier about empathy, it's a short step between like focusing and knowing you're right and walling out the people who really you need to hear from. Mm-hmm. But yeah, doom scrolling is it's a great temptation. You just have to force yourself not to.
A very quick friendly amendment. My 5th grade principal said to me when we had some beef or something among students, she said, "Don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution." Mm-hmm. What I found at those town hall meetings was New Yorkers many times would get up and say, "Here's the problem in our community, and here's what I'd like to know. Can we do this? Or would this work as a different way of doing things?" I think you're absolutely right. You can't wall yourself off from critique or new ideas, but you can wall yourself off from just, hatred for its own sake, or people are just somehow having fun going on Twitter and being nasty.
Yep. Agreed.
Mayor Benjamin?
Yeah, I'd say, especially to the young leaders in that room who might be aspiring to serve in office someday, to never suffer from, I guess, allodoxophobia, the fear of other people's opinions, especially in this age of social media, in which even some of the meanest people in the world have anonymity and they have reach. And it's amazing what kind of courage people have to say some really, really silly things. As you step into potentially in public service, I would tell you to always be open to constructive criticism. As Bill just said, if someone brings you a problem, ask them how would they best solve that problem. But also to take your job seriously, but not take yourself too seriously. Bring to every situation a spirit of humility that realizes that we all fall short in some ways, and there's always an opportunity to learn.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor. Just so you all know, we're going to go for about 5 more minutes or so. I do want to make sure we cover climate change and get to a last question.
5 minutes.
So in 5 minutes. So this is just, I'm flagging this for the mayors here, okay? Let me jump right in. Mayor Parker, you worked for oil and gas companies for years, and of course, you're in the heart of oil and gas country. How did that affect the way you talked about climate change to your constituents?
So yes, I worked in the oil and gas industry for 20 years, and I was in office in Houston for 18. So now I'm on my 3rd career. When I was mayor of Houston, Houston was the largest purchaser of renewable energy, municipal purchaser of renewable energy in America. Not incompatible with being the headquarters for oil and gas. And I was also, Houston was a member of the C40 Climate Leadership Group, and I helped found the climate mayors with Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Nutter from Philly. And again, not at all a conflict with being the world headquarters for the oil and gas industry. But I didn't have the same kinds of conversations with my constituents that other mayors would. I'd go to a C40 meeting, and the mayor of Copenhagen would talk about, I told my citizens we needed to cut so many tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and the words greenhouse gas emissions never came out of my mouth. I would talk about there are economic choices that we can make that are good for the environment and will save you money. It was always bringing it back to something real and tangible in the community and the bottom line issues. Words matter, and if you start with words that people are going to tune out, you're not going to get what you need to achieve. So we were able to make these investments in renewables, and Houston had we beat New York, but New York was not too far behind. It was before he was mayor. We had the largest electric vehicle fleet for a time for any city in the United States. Again, by having the conversation of doing a cost-benefit analysis, real data on the cost of these vehicles. So Houston had about, 1,500 signalized intersections across the city. We made the decision to replace the incandescent bulbs in those traffic signals with LED bulbs. LED bulbs cost 7 times as much, but they last 7 times as long. And then when you put the calculation in, you don't have to have a human being in a bucket truck in those intersections changing out the light bulbs when they go out. That is an easy conversation to have with citizens. You just have to figure out what angle to bring that conversation in.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Benjamin, you experienced some really serious weather events, severe flooding attributed to climate change. And you did something really intriguing, and I want you to talk about it, and that is in response to these events, you issued the first green bonds to finance infrastructure improvement. Can you talk about green bonds as a tool and tell us how they work?
Sure. We had the misfortune in 2015 of being hammered by Hurricane Joaquin all across the Carolinas, but our state saw billions of dollars of damage, 19 precious lives lost in a 1,000-year event that devastated our city, and the city's still recovering from it. We saw it as an opportunity as a city council unanimously to pass the very first standalone stormwater green bond in the country, those certified green by the Climate Bond Initiative. Again, just as we did on guns, using an example of a deep southern city, trying to push some thoughtful, progressive solutions forward for the entire country to see. The principles embedded in that were trying to make sure that we were making long-term investments in returning green infrastructure to the city that men over the course of the last couple hundred years had destroyed in many respects. And again, making investments now that will benefit our citizens, as GT said earlier, for posterity, 50 years or another 100 years. But it was important for us to do. And I'm very proud that our council, again, it's a great example of thoughtful, pragmatic, long-term solutions and contributions that you can make that extend way past party lines if you're doing it for the right reasons.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor de Blasio, you made numerous investments in New York City towards trying to become carbon neutral by 2050. Tell us how they're going to get there. And can you do it? I mean, is this real? And tell us the steps that are being taken as well.
Look, very quick. I think we have to be extremely aggressive, and my view is, what we used to think might work, we've now gotten a hard lesson that we have to take a lot more chances and be much more ambitious in our goals. So we passed legislation in my last year to disallow fossil fuel connections for new buildings, to literally make clear that new buildings could not have on-site energy production related to fossil fuels and had to start connecting to renewable energy. We put a huge amount of electric vehicle charging stations in on the public dime. We passed extremely aggressive, probably the most aggressive in the world for any major city, rules around building retrofits to require energy conservation. I think the bottom line here is, with all due respect to the private sector, they are not going to get there on their own. It's going to take extremely muscular actions by government. I also would say any and all institutions in society should be, with all due respect for former employers, should be divesting from fossil fuel companies. Not because I think that per se is a magic bullet, but because it will be part of forcing the issue that we need radical transformation to renewables, and we've got to change the market dynamics. And the public sector actually can change those market dynamics substantially with aggressive action. So do I think we can get there? Yes, because I think there's a host of policy approaches we haven't even touched yet that we should. I also do believe technology is our friend in this sense. The technology is improving around renewables, around hydrogen. There's like a lot of interesting opportunities that are going to help us along the way, but we better meet that with urgency.
So Bill, it's not just the regulatory side; it's the purchasing side too. We are market makers in our states, the really bigger cities, and I know New York led in that way.
Thank you, thank you. Good cue. I like you. We said by 2025 that all the energy, all the electricity being used by the city government of New York, which is huge, 400,000 employees and a $100 billion operating budget, all our electricity had to be renewable, literally, period. And we funded new transmission lines to connect to hydropower in Quebec with public money. So I agree with you, the purchasing power, the infrastructure changes that local governments can support, let alone what the federal government's done through the extraordinary actions of the Biden administration. Thank you, Steve, for the Inflation Reduction Act, biggest climate action in the history of the Republic. So I really would just urge people to be hopeful, but you got to be really aggressive and use every tool. And if someone says don't use a tool or take your time, they're lying, with all due respect to them.
Thank you for that. I always found that if I could show people that were pushing back in my city, if I could show that the city could save money or residents could save money, people got on board, even if they were skeptical about climate work in my community. Let's go to our final lightning round question. In just a sentence or two, what surprised you most about the job of mayor? And something that you never expected. And what's the best, most satisfying part of the job of mayor? And let's start with Mayor Benjamin.
What surprised me? I think the capacity of people to lead, regular, everyday working people, as we like to say sometimes. It's amazing what the experiences that they bring to the table, how they help me make really thoughtful decisions going forward. So I just say this again, we're talking to each other, but certainly I think we're all really focusing on the young people who are watching this, that we hope will go on and make great contributions in life. That, you know, activism, as Bill was just saying, as activism without action is just a conversation. Commit yourself to leading and working to make the communities in which you will call home better. And I was enthused, Setti, by our citizens who brought real world experiences to the table every single day. I learn from them every day.
That's great. Mayor Parker?
The thing that surprised me the most, by the time I became mayor, I'd been in office in other positions 12 years, and how a mayor is not anonymous ever in their own city. And took off January 1st. The first day I could really take off, it wasn't until Easter. So Easter Sunday morning, I said to my wife, we're gonna go out, and I put a ball cap on, I had my glasses, set my contacts, had sweats. We're out in the park, we're huffing along, and I maybe saw a dozen people, and every one of them did that. It's like, Mayor? I'm like, oh crap, I can't leave the house again. It was, looking like this. And just not being able to, when you're in your own city and you're with your constituents all the time, which is what people who are in legislatures don't understand the difference with mayors. You are with your people. The best part, I shaped the future of my hometown, both the built environment and the world in which Houstonians are going to live for decades.
Ain't bad.
That's great.
Right.
That's great.
For me, it would probably, the most surprising thing has also been the best, which is, I'd been on the city council for 8 years, had worked for other elected officials, but the day that you're sworn in this job, you become the representative of the city. Like Pete Buttigieg does a great job in talking about like this phenomenon in his book about what it's like where all of a sudden people perceive you as like the physical embodiment of the community. That to you, like, you're still the same person, but people view you differently. Like last night flying up here, people are taking selfies with me in the airplane, and I'm like, I'm just the nerd from the debate team that won the election. So I don't know why I'm all of a sudden so great. So that has been the most surprising part, but it has also been the best part because we've had several times in our city where people, and in particular specific groups, have been really hurting. And when I can go to them and tell them how much our city loves them and is there for them, it's not, hey, I, GT Bynum, am here for you and I love you. They feel the love of our city for them in a really hard moment. And those have been the best moments for me, when I can give somebody that sense that this is a community that is there for them, just by the fact that I happen to be the mayor and I'm there talking with them.
I love that. Well, I hope what everyone's hearing is it's worth it. It is worth it. I mean, all my colleagues, we all went through a lot of stuff and some very tough times, but I don't think any of us would trade it in. The surprising thing, the analogy is I once was invited to a football game in New York Giants and got to stand by the sidelines. I'd never done that before. And when you stand by the sidelines, you watch the kickoff. The speed with which the players are going it's totally different than on television. It's like extraordinarily fast. Like, how are human beings going this fast? Well, that is my analogy to what I did not understand about being mayor until I got there. I had watched it on TV, you know. I had been a staffer in City Hall. I'd done all these things. But when you get there, it speeds up. The game speeds up in this extraordinary way because suddenly everything's coming your way. And you don't get to call a timeout, unlike in sports. There is no timeout when you're mayor. The great part, and why I think what you're hearing in the voices of all of us, it is the most soul-satisfying work you could possibly imagine. I did not even have an inkling of how moving it would be. And I'll give you the easiest example. The thing I'm proudest of is we did universal pre-K for free, high-quality, full-day pre-K for all the kids in New York City. And we're reaching 60, 70,000 kids a year. And when one of those parents comes up who wouldn't have been able to have their kid in pre-K, couldn't afford it, couldn't find a program, they talk about how it changed their lives. You're like, well, all of the problems, the negativity, the critiques, all that, the sleepless nights, all that fades away instantly because you see a human being in front of you that you were able to do something for their life and make their life better. And that's just, doesn't get better than that.
Well, you can, in this last 45 minutes, you could really feel the care that you had for the residents of your city, the thoughtful nature of your administrations and how you approach these complex problems. And it's been wonderful listening to your comments and remarks. Can you give this great panel a round of applause?
And our moderator. He led with justice and fairness.
I tried. I didn't pull any fast ones on you. This has been a terrific conversation. For those of you in studio audience, stick around. We'll do some off-the-record Q&A with the mayors. For everyone online, thank you so much for tuning in. Good afternoon.